Welcome to another episode of the No Excuses, Embrace the Challenge motivational platform. I'm Lee Toldson, aka Coach T, and on side of me is my lovely wife, Stephanie Toldson, owner of Align Counseling Services. This space is for anyone who is looking for motivation. This is where a coach and a counselor come together and give you real life topics. Today, we're going to continue with our Adversity series, part 2, but we're going to dive a little deeper. We're going to go into some of our personal adversities. Stephanie, we both know that adversity doesn't just knock on the door and say, hey, I'm here. It just shows up. Sometimes it shows up in a health scare. Sometimes it shows up in a loss. For me, it showed up in many ways. I remember at the age of 12, I watched my grandmother take her last breaths right in front of me. And that was really hard for me because she was like my world. And I remember us rushing her to the hospital. I was in the front seat of the car, and I'm turned around, and I'm just screaming her name and asking her to hold on. And when we got to the hospital, and in a small town, they locked the emergency doors late at night. And I remember running up to the emergency doors, knocking on them. And the last time I saw her is when they took her back. And I remember that doctor coming and saying, hey, she didn't make it. And that really broke me at the age of 12. When you're that young, you don't really understand death, but you understand the pain. You understand that your life can change within a moment. And that moment has stuck with me to this day. And later in life, adversity struck again. I lost one of my aunts to domestic violence. Her husband took her life. And that's someone that I shared a lot of moments with. And then later, I lost another aunt who was like a mom to me to cancer. This is someone that I would talk to about everything. And to be honest, I've lost so many people in my life, I can't even keep count. And those are the type of scars that you don't really see on the outside, but you carry on the inside. But one thing that I learned about scars, you can either let your scars break you or build you. And for all my scars, I said, you know what? I'm going to use them to build me. And that's why I'm the person that I am today. Later in life, I faced my own personal adversity. I had a heart attack in 2017. For me, that was hard. I grew up playing sports. I was a coach. I was big into CrossFit at the time. And in my head, I'm saying, man, this can't be happening to me. But what it did, it forced me to really reflect and slow down. What I realized is that no one is invisible. And what that adversity taught me is this, and I want you guys to listen. It taught me that adversity doesn't come to destroy. It comes to reveal. And I'll say that again. Adversity doesn't come to destroy. It comes to reveal. It reveals your character. It reveals your mindset. It reveals if you're going to fight or give up. And with my adversity, I chose to fight. Some people let adversity write their story. I use all my adversity to rewrite mine. And every time I face adversity, one question that I ask myself, Steph, I say, am I going to make excuses or am I going to embrace this? And that's where that no excuses mindset was born. Even though it might hurt, I always choose to embrace the adversity. Some of you guys listening to this, you might get knocked down, but hear me out when I say this. Don't stay down for the count. Just understand adversity is not your final buzzer. It is the game of life. So if you're facing adversity, don't quit. Keep going. That is some of the adversity that I've faced in my life. Steph, what are some adversities that you faced in your own personal life?
Well, thank you, Lee. That was great. This is a kind of a hard episode. I'm not going to lie. We put it off for a week because of travel schedules and stuff. And I think in the last episode I mentioned, don't just look at someone's current situation as a comparison to where you might be at. And I say that because of personal experiences I've been through and personal experiences Lee has been through. Because what you see on the outside, it's just a glimmer of maybe part of the story. So I wanted to talk today about situations that have happened in my adult life that have shaped me to become a better person, and they've shaped me to just be a better mom, a better partner, a better counselor too. A lot of my career path has been shaped by my own personal experiences. I spoke on this last year at a mental health symposium. I was asked to talk about like self-compassion and how that applies to mental health workers and to police officers. Because as we know, we see it all the time in the news, like we all are struggling with something, one thing or another. And so with that said, I wanted to take it back to 2020. Well, I'm going to take it back to like 2016. And around that time, my former husband was really kind of teetering on the edge of addiction. And we had some infertility issues. And then we were told, you're not going to be able to get pregnant on your own. And so we were kind of exploring some options at that point. But I ended up getting pregnant. And it was kind of scary, but like also exciting at the same time. And within a month, I'd had a miscarriage, which we weren't expecting that at all. I had no idea like what that would be like, but it ended up taking me into a pretty big, significant grief cycle at that time, because at that point, my best friend, my sister, it seemed like everyone around me was pregnant and having babies, and that was like the one thing I wanted, but I couldn't have it. And at that time, it really just, from the way I perceive it, threw my former husband into a huge spiral. His grief ended up throwing him into a pretty big spiral of addiction. And so for about 3.5 years, I sat back and watched what went from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum, where I had no control. I tried to control things. I tried to fix it and control it, but that's an illusion. I absolutely had no control. And what ended in, my biggest adversity to date was I watched the person that I loved and cared about. He ended up passing away of liver failure within a 3.5 year span. Drugs and alcohol just took him. And that taught me a lot about just the reality of how easy it is for somebody that comes from kind of a semi-normal, healthy background to it doesn't matter. Drugs and alcohol have they know no bounds. What we perceive as someone like the bum on the corner is absolutely not true. And I found that a lot in my career. A lot of people have a lot of shame and secrecy when it comes to addiction. So a lot of that shaped who I am today, because it threw me into a lot of my own trauma and grief, but I found a lot of healing along the way. So, and I opened myself up more to that process of healing in the midst of my own career. So that was a lot of what I spoke on last year too, is we are not exempt from living this life and having adversity, even working in the mental health field or being a teacher, a coach. We're going to have adversity. It's just how do we as the professionals, how do we in these positions of helping others, how do we also help ourselves through our own adversity? So something I have found was just looking for little glimmers of hope. And a lot of that came in the community I had built. I had a strong faith in God. I had a strong, and I still do, I have a strong faith in my friends and my family. My work was absolutely pivotal at that point in helping me through that time, because I think I'm blessed in that sense, because I worked in the mental health field and in a community agency. They could absolutely understand this wasn't how things had started in my life, but this is where they were going. And so I had a lot of people holding me through that. And I found a lot of just healing in the yoga community, learning how to connect mind, body, spirit, because my nervous system got so wired for trauma, and that's not who I was, but that became who I became, that, if that makes sense. Like the chaos became kind of the norm, and I knew I needed to get out of it. So I had to make some pretty hard decisions after about 3 years of going back and forth. It became such a cycle of, there were really good times, and then there were really bad times. And the trauma bonding is it's a real phenomenon. And I had never experienced that before until that time. About 2019, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I had to make a really hard decision to fully get away from it and just rewire my nervous system to come back to kind of this homeostasis. And I spent a lot of time alone at that time, going on hikes, working out, yoga, anything that was going to help me just reset myself. I found a lot of forgiveness. I found a lot of grace for myself, for my former husband. And sadly at that time, and this wasn't easy either, I'm just going to say that, there are times that the old secretary at my former employment, she will sometimes reach out because she'll come across like notes. We had to start documenting when like phone calls were coming through from my former husband because I had to block him. It got so bad that in order to get away from it, I had to fully commit to getting away from it. So there was a lot of desperation he didn't want to be left alone. And that was so hard for me. And to feel like you're abandoning someone in the throes of their worst time. I didn't know it at the time either, but he was also reaching out to my dad. They were pretty close. And I'm actually really thankful for that because I didn't want him to feel unloved or abandoned, but I knew for my own safety and well-being, I had to just cut the ties. So for about 5 months, I just kept everything separate, and that helped me reset my nervous system. But sadly, things continued to spiral in his life. And within a 11-month period, it went from warning about your liver to now you're in the throes of liver failure. And he was in and out of the hospital by that November of 2020 and had lost his life to addiction in December of 2020. So even though I knew the relationship was over, and I had taken the steps to try to file for divorce, and it was really difficult. I don't want to go into too much depth because he's a good person. He wasn't himself at that time, but even trying to get divorced, he was difficult to be with, difficult to try to get away from. So we ended our relationship as married on paper, but we really hadn't been together for a long time. And that was something I did not expect because when I started that relationship, everything was kind of blissful. And I was in a really happy place. That 3 years where it spiraled, I really had to come to a place of understanding, like, this is the reality of life. This is the reality of what can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter. Like I said, addiction knows no bounds. But also, it taught me a lot about how I wanted to move forward in my own life. And I came across this video. So if you guys are into YouTube, I suggest researching Will Smith, Fault versus Responsibility, because for about 2 years, I sat on the fence of like, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is he doing this? And I just kept obsessing about the addiction and what I could do to try to fix it. So I kind of became manipulative in my own way with that. But I came across this video that really stuck out to me. And honestly, it didn't matter what my friends said, what my family said. I had to come to these conclusions on my own. And I'm the type of person that I don't just cut someone out of my life. I give multiple chances because I really go into something with my whole heart. And but this video stood out to me, and it's the Fault versus Responsibility video by Will Smith. And I was not taking responsibility for my own life. I was stuck in this victim fault mentality. Like, it's not my fault. He has to get better. Things have to get better on his end before it can get better on my end. And then slowly but surely, I started to shift my mindset to, instead of asking questions like, why is he doing this? I started asking myself questions like, well, why am I putting up with this? Why do I keep putting myself back in the fire, knowing what the outcome is likely going to be? I rode on that false hope thinking, well, this is the time he's going to get it. Every DUI, every car crash, every hospital visit. I just thought this will be it, but it never really was. And so I had to start to shift out of the fault mentality into the responsibility mentality. And that really stood out to me as well, beyond just helping my nervous system heal, was taking that responsibility for my own life and my own healing, because I kept externalizing that to him and to other people, but that wasn't gonna happen. So my suggestion is, first of all, don't look at someone's current outcome as a comparison to your own life, because we have all gone through adversity, and possibly people that you are surrounded with are going through adversity and you don't even know it. Second off, take responsibility for your own life and for your own healing. Too often we do externalize our healing and our well-being to, well, once they're better, then I'll be better. Or once this coach gets it, then I'll get the playing time I need. No, you have to take responsibility and earn what you're gonna get in playing time, or whether it's in a personal life setting, in like a sports setting, in your career. That's my suggestion for people, is to really take responsibility for their healing and their well-being, because sadly nobody is coming to save us, but we will have the support in the community there to help support us through the adversity we're going through.
I know that was hard for you, but I guess one of the hardest things for people to do is open up about some of the things they're going through. They keep it in and they don't share with anyone. And so for me, having someone to talk to and to be able to open up helps me out. Before we're done today, I want to read something. But Steph, I know that you had one more piece that you want to add.
Yeah, there's a couple of other things I wanted to add. Sorry. So when I met Lee, it was interesting. I'm gonna tell the listeners the story of how we met. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, lo and behold, I had spent all this time alone, and I was really committed to just my single life. I really loved I loved my career, and I had this dog at the time, and that was my child. I was the favorite aunt that spent all the time with the nieces and nephews. And our mutual friend Ike, kept trying to put this like buzz in both of our ears that we needed to meet. And if you know Ike Johnson, you'll know he's not the matchmaker type. So I thought it was really interesting and odd. So for about 2 months, I put that off, because deep down inside me, I had all this fear. I didn't want to get hurt again. I didn't want to, even though I had done all this healing on my own and I knew I was in a good place mentally and emotionally, it takes a brave person to step back in the ring with like a risk of, maybe it's a risk in your career, or a risk in love, a risk in sports. I didn't want to take that risk. But I'm like, I had this thought, why would I keep pushing? He knows something we don't know. So we often joke about the way we met, because we were both pretty resistant to dating, and yeah, when you get older, it's not fun. But I also lean on to this quote. My mom sent me this quote back in like 2019 or 2020. I can't remember. And it was also a quote that was added to the back of Chad's, like the obituary. So I wanted to read that. And for those of you that, I'm not trying to push religion, or I'm not trying to push anything that makes you uncomfortable, but this is just my own personal belief after the experiences I've gone through, and after going through such significant loss in my like early to mid 30s. It goes, "The Lord compensates the faithful for every loss, ensuring that what is taken away will be returned 100-fold through his mercy. Through the atonement of Jesus Christ, believers are strengthened to overcome sorrow with the promise that every injustice and heartache will be healed in this life or eternity." And I feel like that very much rings true in my life, because of where I'm at now. I now have a child. I lost a child at one point, and that was like the one thing I wanted. I had healed and come to an acceptance that by the time I was like 33, 34, I just had accepted I'm probably going to meet somebody with kids, but I'm probably not going to have my own child. But God had other plans in place, and now I have this beautiful 3.5-year-old son. I have a husband that we have a really healthy relationship. That's something I had never experienced before, but because of the commitment and the responsibility both of us have taken in our own lives, we get to experience kind of this, I'm not going to say it's a blessing after loss, but it's something that's come after loss because of the responsibility we have taken. So if anything, just remember that, like once you can take that responsibility, you get out of that stuckness. And the stuckness is where a lot of people get kind of stifled in their healing, is externalizing and feeling like they've been victimized. And oftentimes we are a victim to someone else's choices, but that doesn't mean we can't take responsibility for our healing.
I want to read something. This is something that I wrote this morning, actually. And I want to leave you guys with this here. Your scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof you survived something that could have broken you, and you're still here. If you like this episode, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and follow. And until next time, remember, no excuses, embrace the challenge.
Embrace the challenge, no excuses, embrace the challenge. Embrace the challenge. Embrace the challenge. You better embrace the challenge. Embrace the challenge, no excuses.